Rumours it might happen have been circulating for weeks. Now it's a reality. Pakistan is under a state of emergency, a dramatic and controversial step by President Musharraf. Let's take a look at how the events unfolded there. Private television channels quoted unnamed sources as saying the government had decided to declare emergency rule. Shortly afterwards, several TV channels came off air in Pakistan. Military troops were then deployed inside the state-run TV and radio stations, and telephone services were cut. Roads leading up to the Supreme Court in Islamabad were sealed off and police surrounded the court. And there were some reports that judges and others said Pakistan's Chief Justice had been led away. Then came news that a special cabinet meeting had been called and that President Musharraf would address the nation in about an hour from now. We'll get the latest from Islamabad shortly, but first, Owen Fay has this report.
Pakistan's political future began to grow more complicated early in September. On the 10th, the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif attempted to return from exile. He has long been an outspoken opponent of Pervez Musharraf, highly critical of the man who overthrew him in a coup in 1999. In the end, Sharif only spent about 4 hours on Pakistani soil before being deported yet again. He and his supporters and the PMLN party have vowed to continue their efforts to drive Musharraf from office and oppose any compromise plan he may introduce to stay in power. If there is to be a deal, it's likely to be reached with Benazir Bhutto, who has herself returned to Pakistan just over a month after Sharif's failed attempt. Surrounded by crowds estimated in the hundreds of thousands, Bhutto arrived back in the country on the 19th of October. That return, however, was marred by a massive suicide bombing which killed more than 120 people. But the sheer scale of Bhutto's support within the Pakistan People's Party makes her the most likely candidate to share power with Musharraf if he shows willingness to reach some sort of compromise. While those discussions continue, the president is still awaiting a decision by the country's Supreme Court on the legitimacy of his presidency, whether he was legally allowed to run for and then win re-election while still Army Chief of Staff, an election many consider invalid because it was boycotted by the majority of the country's opposition. The court recently announced it will speed up its decision and possibly issue a verdict in the next few days. But that announcement came prior to this decision and may yet get delayed because of the state of emergency. Musharraf's move also means that any power-sharing plan may well now be postponed, if not actually abandoned altogether. With support for Musharraf slipping significantly across the country, reaching a deal with Bhutto may represent Musharraf's best hope for retaining both power and legitimacy. Now, after declaring a state of emergency, the chances of any deal taking place seem remote. Owen Fay, Al Jazeera.
Well, we're now joined by our correspondent Kamal Haider, who's standing by there in Islamabad. Kamal, what's happening on the streets of the city? Has the state of emergency kicked in?
Well, people are still grasping the whole idea of the imposition of emergency now. But having said that, you must understand that many of the judges have refused to take oath under the provisional constitutional order. Just one example, the province of Sindh, where 27 judges, out of those only 12 were called by the government and only 4 agreed. Even at the Supreme Court, 4 judges taking that oath, including the new Chief Justice, others refusing. So across the country, the judiciary has said a big no as far as the imposition of this emergency rule is concerned. Also surprising that while the opposition has strongly criticized the government, Benazir has said to the media that she's not offering any comment, which also leads to suspicions that a deal, in fact, worked out between Musharraf and Benazir may be unfolding with the imposition of emergency rule. So a lot of speculation in Islamabad tonight.
And Kamal, there were reports that Benazir Bhutto had arrived at Karachi airport, or that maybe she was on her way there. What have you been hearing about that? Where is she at the moment?
Well, we have been told that she is expected to arrive in Karachi. We've been also told that she boarded the plane in Dubai. No confirmation on that. Of course, throughout the country, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the media outlets have been taken off the air, and a new promulgation has been a new ordinance has been issued. This is the media ordinance, a 35-page document which will impose severe restrictions on the media. And once that becomes clear, it will be quite clear also as to why the government is now curbing down on the media so hard, and as to what will be the do's and don'ts as far as that ordinance is concerned.
And just to clarify this, Kamal, does a state of emergency necessarily mean martial law?
Well, people will tell you that the Constitution has been suspended, that this is a military takeover. A lot of the critics of the government are already saying that this is actually a coup d'etat of sorts, another takeover. They will tell you that this is no way to carry on the business of statecraft, and people will tell you that this is unacceptable to them. Civil society at large is very critical, and today the opposition itself is saying that the act by a few judges, and that coming from Imran Khan's party, that the act by a few judges is indeed a brave act by them and shows that these are people with good conduct.
Kamal Haider in Islamabad, thanks very much. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is promising to take urgent measures against the Kurdish fighters of the PKK based in northern Iraq. He's also ordered the shutdown of PKK offices. Prime Minister Maliki announced the moves at a conference in Turkey focusing on Iraq's future. But the tensions on the border of Turkey and Iraq have dominated the meeting. Well, speaking to the media after the talks were over, Iraqi Foreign Minister Hoshyar Zebari reiterated Iraq's commitment to protecting Turkey from the actions of PKK fighters.
Nobody should be under any illusion that the Iraqi government is very serious to cooperate actively and to lend its active support to the Turkish government in combating, in containing, in diminishing the PKK terrorism and the activities directed against the Turkish military, soldiers and citizens. This should be very clear, and the position here is a united one.
The United Nations envoy to Myanmar has returned to the country just as the ruling military junta steps up its threats to expel another senior UN diplomat. It's Ibrahim Gambari's second visit following September's deadly clashes between the army and pro-democracy activists. Paul Allen has more now on the diplomatic row that's threatening to overtake efforts to bring reform to the country.
On the eve of a second United Nations visit to Myanmar, conflicting signs from the military rulers. While inviting Ibrahim Gambari back in after the September crackdown, the regime's moving to kick out Charles Petrie, who's been running the UN's development program. The reason given was Petrie's sharp criticism of the military's handling of the popular protests.
The Secretary General is disappointed by the message from the government of Myanmar stating that it would not want the resident coordinator, Mr. Charles Petrie, to continue to serve in Myanmar.
Disappointment with Myanmar has become a familiar theme for the UN. Gambari's mission is again to promote talks between the generals and the opposition National League for Democracy. On the eve of his second trip, France has introduced a draft resolution to the UN condemning the violent crackdown. It's not legally binding, but it is an indicator of world opinion, which the military has had no problems in the past ignoring. Even the involvement of the country's revered monks in the protests didn't dilute the government's response. Monks tell Al Jazeera they're uncomfortable in their new role in pushing for political reform, but are determined to bring change.
Monks give to the people. We stay in the temple, we pray. That's how monks are. Now we are becoming political. It's not good. It's not what monks should do.
Monks also like democracy, because now even monks are told where to stay, what to do, where to go, so they don't like that. That's why we like democracy.
The desire for change still simmers in Myanmar, and while the barbed wire has been taken down, it still lies in coils on the streets. Paul Allen, Al Jazeera.